This is JCT TV, Bible study for the 21st century. I think you've been enjoying Dr. Van Johnson. I certainly have. He's the Dean of Master's Seminary, and also he is adjunct professor at Tyndale Seminary. He's a remarkable spokesman, very articulate, and a good friend. He's joining me for the last show of this month, coming up in just a few moments, and I know you won't want to miss it. And there's no surprise now, he also will join me for the Bible teaching segment, a bit of a change in format. So enjoy Dr. Johnson, and I'll be back with him right after this.
Jim Cantelon Today is a program dedicated to the teaching of the good news of Jesus Christ. This all through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. JCT also brings to you encouraging testimonies and stories from Christian leaders all over the globe. If this program has added value to your life, would you please consider becoming a partner? To do so, simply contact us by phone, mail, or online.
Friends, as I said off the top, Dr. Van Johnson is not just a professor, but he's also a friend and a fellow preacher's kid who has specialized in his PhD studies in what we refer to as eschatology, the doctrine of the end times. And we've been having quite the conversation over the course of this month, and I know that you've enjoyed it. And if you've missed it, just Google Jim Cantelon Today and find it on the internet. You can pick up, you know, if anything you've lost in the past. Or maybe Van has been so obtuse in his description that you need to go back and kind of go at it word by word. I'm joking.
Yeah.
Something came up last week that I think we need to build on. When I mentioned the concept of prayer in a synagogue, you got to have 10 men in order to pray. And I made the comment about maybe sometimes we over-personalize or subjectivize our relationship with Jesus. That's not to say we cannot commit ourselves to him personally, but I guess the question is, are we a Christian in isolation, or are we a Christian in community, or is there a blending of the two? Is it either or? Is it both and? Where do you come down on that?
I hope I'm coming down on it biblically on this, and my own life story illustrates it. We finished episode 1 with me telling you that I have never been the one to ask, how do you discern the will of God? Because it has often caught me by surprise. One of the reasons it's caught me by surprise is that I couldn't always see what others did. And so even my charting into ministry was not me simply alone saying, God, what have you called me to do? But discerning what others saw in me too. And that's shaped me, see? So when we talk about being a Christian in isolation, I'm thinking, I can't relate to this at all. My dad, mom, shaped for me how I thought of God as loving and kind. And it was my family and others who helped me, Jim, along the way to see what I was good at and to help me channel it. So it's all I've ever known. And I do tell students, and I'm very sincere about it, that I will never pretend when I stand in front of a room that I will know the answer to every question they ask. And I don't think students often believe me, but I always say, look, you're going to teach me something, and I may just tell you that you did. The way the question is asked, or they'll bring up an insight, and you know, they've seen me note down some of the things they have said. So I've never personally experienced it. But it's interesting how maybe because of the excess of Western individualism that we tend to think, well, you know, I must be a self-made man, a self-made woman, and so it's up to me and it's about me. But it's a bit of a strange world if you come into the New Testament with that attitude, because the New Testament is more driven by the social dimension. Back there, it was the family that was important, not just the individual. we've flipped it, right? Back in the day, you were expected to continue to live in the Father's house and bring honor to the family name. Now today, we gladly send our kids away to other places. We don't expect them to live with us. We're happy when they don't sometimes and they go on. We've just flipped it, and I'm not making any value judgment on it, but we value the individual in a different way and value our kids in a different way in terms of trying to foster their individuality. When Jesus says, bring the little kids to me, I think sometimes we misread it, and that's Jesus saying, well, I love little kids because they're loving and humble and kind. What he was really doing is, bring the ones that in terms of society really don't count for anything, bring them to me, right? Because we've just sort of flipped it. I've heard parents say, I live for my kids, and I'm thinking, okay, that's good, so who's living for God? They're gonna live for God. Well, hopefully they don't live for their kids, right? So I think it's fascinating to come to the New Testament text and think we should probably be seeing this more, how it affects us as Christians, as a church, rather than individuals. Okay, your question was pointed. Sorry, a little bit of background before I got to it. Are we Christian in isolation, or are we Christian together? The best answer I have is that because we do make individual choices, we come to Jesus based on a personal, individual decision. But the moment we do, something happens and we get linked to others. So, if you will, we come alone, but the moment we meet Jesus, we're never alone again. We immediately become attached to a larger group of people. I just turned to it, knowing we'd come back to it. 1 Corinthians 12, all the body language, right? Mm-hmm. We come to it individually, but what happens is we immediately become linked up. And that's his whole body-driven narrative here. Mm-hmm. You can't live by yourself. The eye can't say to another part of the body, I don't need you. That makes no sense to Paul. And it makes no sense to me either. Look, I understand Christians who have gone through hurt and discouragement, and there's a lot of things to be discouraged about when you think of some dark waters some churches have gone through. But my encouragement to people always is, but don't stay there, because you're in a bit of an unnatural space. You didn't come to Jesus to survive on your own. You came to Jesus to be part of a larger group. And if you're in a temporary rut, it's difficult to find a good category for a personal Christian. Remember the old Johnny Cash song, My Own Personal Jesus, in Depeche Mode recorded it, and it was a critique, right? That we wanted Jesus that helps us, when instead the idea is you come to Jesus and we all make our contribution and help others, right?
One of the interesting observations that those who study these things have made, vis-a-vis the great gulf fix between the Protestant and the Roman Catholic world, is that in the Roman Catholic world, the church is mother, and the church looks after you. You are cared for by the church, right. And you are not alone. You are a part of a family now, and there is a certain hierarchical structure there that ultimately, the Papa, the Pope, oversees. Right. But in the Protestant world, especially the Protestant evangelical world, it's kind of the antithesis of that, in the sense that it's sort of been enculturated into the highly individualistic, entrepreneurial Western culture, where everything is individual. Yeah. So you got individual salvation, you got a personal Jesus, and there's strength in both camps. Sure. But what you're saying is, don't think of it as either or, think of it as both and.
Right. And my view of my local church affects how I see the broader church. So I'm a Pentecostal at Tyndale, which is transdenominational, many denominations. It's the ideal place for me to teach, and it's the ideal place for me to train Pentecostals, for I run a program for Pentecostals, and others who come in. And I will say at one point, look, this is really healthy for us, because I think in the same way that God uses different individuals in a local church, one with this gift, one with this gift, one with that gift, so that happens across the globe. I think God raises up different denominations and different groups at different times to fill a need. And the reason why I enjoy Tyndale so much is that it allows me to demonstrate that I'm serious about it, that I am learning from these other traditions as my students are learning from other traditions. We bring our best to the table, but we're not the only ones supplying food for the banquet. The banquet is larger, and we find our place at the table with other denominations. And so without giving up my Pentecostalism, I'm trying to help students understand their tradition, we are benefiting from understanding that it's not our own personal denomination, let alone our own personal Jesus. That the work of God is always much larger. And anytime we reduce it just down to ourselves, we're walking into some dark territory.
When you talk about your Pentecostalism, I think most people understand that the Pentecostal church in general, the Pentecostal/charismatic church around the world, is a force. I mean, there's more Pentecostal/charismatic believers in the world than all other Protestant denominations combined. But you would, I think, with me, say, well, I'm a Christian first, a Pentecostal second, capital C Christian, small p Pentecostal.
Absolutely.
What is about the Pentecostals, however, that has given them this cutting edge impact in the world, do you think?
Jim, you said it well. I love Jesus.
Yeah.
The way I'm able to express it is through a particular community, because that's where I was raised.
Yeah.
I love Jesus. Here's my means of expressing it, right? And I think what has caught the world's attention with Pentecostals starting about 100 years ago now, our denomination, Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, just hit 100, was that we thought that if people experience Jesus, they should experience Jesus at every level of their being. That it was not only understanding the word, but experiencing it, right? So that this experiential aspect is not denigrated for the intellectual aspect, but we love God with our body, soul, and mind. And I think that's one of the things that has allowed Pentecostalism to move forward. And the other one is, because this is about eschatology, is the sense that Jesus was coming soon. Yeah. And what you had was a great missionary movement. People actually got on boats, Jim.
Yeah.
They actually sold the farm. We use it as a phrase. Some people actually sold the farm because they thought that the end of times was so close. The signs were everywhere. The signs of the times are in the air, so they got on the water and tried to bring Jesus. And I think one of the reasons Pentecostalism has spread so globally is it's been driven by this sense we need to lean forward. If he's coming for us, we're not leaning back. We're leaning forward so we can bring as many people with us when he comes.
I wish I had more time to ask you about that. I'll deal with it in my teaching segment, but a lot of people are disappointed because in history so far, Jesus has not returned.
Right.
Were they wrong? All these people who preached it, expected it, lived it? Or is it just that the economy of scale is a little off in terms of space and time? 1,000 days, 1,000 years, like a day in God's sight. What does the end of days mean if that's the case? Are we near the end of days, or are we at the beginning of the end of days? I'll have to bring you back sometime and we'll talk more about that.
Unless Jesus returns first.
Unless Jesus returns first, and that's a very appropriate thing to say. Thank you, Van Johnson.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Been a great guest all month. I'll be back with our Bible teaching segment, friends, right after this short break.
JCT TV is the official voice of WOW, working for orphans and widows. Jim Cantelon is the founder of WOW and has been ministering to orphans and widows in distress for 18 years. WOW's focus is home-based care for the dying. The horizon is vast, with thousands of the least of these in Africa and India. WOW depends on your generous support. To connect with us, you can call us at 1-800-969-9551, or you can visit us online at wowmission.com.
We are now looking at the third parable in Matthew 25. And this is the parable of the sheep and the goats. This one really fascinates me, friends. Let's read it first. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, this is Jesus talking, of course, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people from one another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right, the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me." And the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he'll say to those on the left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I needed clothes, you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you didn't look after me." They also will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and didn't help you?" He will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life." The surprise I mentioned off the top, friends, Van Johnson is with me for this. And
Still here.
Still here.
I'm getting you through the judgment, Jim.
Yeah, okay, well, speaking of judgment, again and again and again here, Jesus keeps warning about judgment, warning about eternal punishment. You said off camera that you wanted to comment on that.
Right. So I read Jewish apocalyptic literature, very much like the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
And there were multiple visions of what the end would look like. Sometimes just the righteous are resurrected. Sometimes the wicked and the righteous are resurrected to face judgment. Mm-hmm. The one staple in every Jewish apocalyptic piece that I read was, there is a day when everyone will be judged. Judgment was a fixture. And the angle on it that was interesting was that judgment wasn't simply personal again, but it was a way of God's glory and righteousness being seen in the earth. We talked about how we personalize things. At the judgment, that's when the world sees who God truly is. That's when the world sees who the people of God truly are. So it's not just, okay, everybody's getting what they deserve, but on that moment, the people who have been faithful, that's when their faithfulness is seen, and that's when God's glory is truly seen, because he kept his word to his people, and he called all people to be accountable, and that's the day when that happens. So judgment is a regular fixture, so I'm not surprised to see it here. But judgment is larger just, where'd you fail, where'd you fail? It is a way of the world saying that truly God was the one who honored his word and holds us all to account.
When Jesus talks about, in this parable, about the nations, he's talking about the Gentiles, okay? And remember, he's telling this parable to a mainly Jewish group of people, although the Galilee, where Jesus did most of his ministry, was known as Galilee of the Gentiles. And so there were always Gentiles in these crowds that followed Jesus around. You can be sure of that. But when he refers to the nations, he's referring to the Gentiles. And he uses the imagery here of dividing the nations. Remember, it's the nations he's dividing here, like he would, a shepherd would divide sheep from goats and goats from sheep. He's just using that as an analogous way of saying there is going to be a division, and the division is going to be predicated on what they did for the king. Now, the king, of course, is Jesus. He's the Messiah. But the nations represent people who predated Jesus. Right, Van?
Sure.
We're talking about the Egyptians. We're talking about the Macedonians.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the Assyrians. We're talking about the Babylonians. We're talking about the, the ancient Chinese and Japanese civilizations. Thousands of generations of people who preceded Jesus coming on the scene. John tells us in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world." He doesn't love the world just as it exists after Jesus. He loves the creation. He loves all men and women that the Lord has ever created. The point being, friends, that the pivot point when it comes to salvation in the historical salvific story, the pivot point is the Lamb who was slain. Any who are saved on that day, and don't ask me to explain how this happens, friends, and don't accuse me of some weird doctrine, because this is not weird. All I know is the Bible teaches anyone and everyone who is saved on that day will be saved because of and through the blood of the Lamb shed on Calvary's cross. Whether people had an awareness that they were doing something as unto the Lord or not. The point is that if we are saved, we're saved because the Lamb was slain for our sin. Okay? So.
And sin here is defined socially, Jim.
Yeah.
And you've given much of your life to this.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting? This is not, are you watching the wrong thing? Are you drinking too much of this? This, again, is social.
Social. And you're right. I've made it clear to our viewers, Van, that we are the official spokesman, JCT, for WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows.
Great name.
And I'm just back from Africa and India, and we are working with orphans and widows on a large scale, have been doing so now for about 20 years. And whenever I'm writing our supporters and referring to it now on the television show, I often refer to them as the least of these, right from this passage. Inasmuch as you did it to the least of these, my brethren, you did it unto me. Inasmuch as you did it not to the least of these, my brethren, you did it not unto me. There is a very, very strong call from Jesus' life and example to ministering to the least of these, to ministry to the poor. And Jesus modeled it, Van, the last, the least, and the lost. I mean, he was known for having the wrong friends.
Yeah. Blessed are the poor. God the Spirit has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. That becomes his preferred audience. And if we're going to be related to this king, we can't lose sight of the least of these either, Jim.
Yeah, I think it's in Luke 4 where Luke quotes Jesus in the synagogue in
Absolutely,
in Nazareth.
It's Luke 4.
He's quoting Isaiah when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor."
To the poor.
And he goes on to quote that passage from Isaiah 61. This was his priority.
Yeah, that's right.
And
the Spirit was going to anoint him to proclaim it, because it was a proclamation that set people free, right? Recovery of sight for the blind, release for the captives. So we shouldn't be surprised that we find it here.
Yeah.
If this is Jesus' priority and we're serving this king, then it should be ours too.
See, too often, I think, friends, and I think Van would agree with me on this, if not, you can object, Van, but I think too often we have seen ourselves as evangelicals, especially evangelical Protestants, as almost in a triumphalist kind of way, We win. We're riding the right horse,
Right,
and everybody else is in big trouble.
Yeah.
I think the litmus test, James really nails it when he says, "You say you have faith without works." He says, "I'll show you my faith by my works."
They're all social sins, James and James, right?
So
Jim and James.
Jim and James, And to the point where Martin Luther wanted to kick the book of James out of the Bible because he saw it as too social in its focus, too, if you will, socialistic in its concern for love of neighbor. But it's a brilliant book. I often refer to myself as a book of James kind of Christian.
There you go.
Friends, let me take this last minute, and I want to thank. This is our fourth time with this. Yeah. So you've been a major player this month, Van, and so grateful for that.
Yeah, thanks.
But let me just take this last minute or so, friends, just to challenge you with something. I've often mentioned that we care for orphans and widows with Working for Orphans and Widows, and we promote it on the show. I'm really serious about this. we do need you to support the program. But what I'm saying is support Working for Orphans and Widows. And JCT's very modest production expenses are now a line item in the overall WOW budget, because our number one emphasis is the least of these. We want you to be involved with us in the care of orphans and widows. And I hope you will.
Friends, as you know, Jim Cantelon has been offering Cantelon's Casual Commentary as a Bible study supplement to his ongoing exposition of St. Matthew's Gospel on JCT TV. He's excited to offer Volume 4, which completes the Matthew study. The Transfiguration, Triumphal Entry, Crucifixion, and Resurrection of Jesus Christ are all covered in this volume. Like the first 3 volumes, it's concise, captivating, and casual. To order your copy, you can call, write, or go online. Write to Jim Cantelon today, Post Office Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7, or call us at 519-415-8341. You can also order online at jimcantelontoday.com. Request Cantelon's Casual Commentary Volume 4, and for a gift in any amount, it will be sent to you. When you place your order, also consider becoming a monthly partner. Remember, your gifts help us build this ministry.
Remember, friends, JCT is official spokesman for Working for Orphans and Widows. My wife and I founded both ministries. Now we've combined them. JCT is a spokesman for a ministry that for almost 20 years now has been working with orphans and widows in sub-Saharan Africa, especially those who are dying because of HIV and AIDS, many orphans raising themselves. And we just want you to know that supporting JCT, supporting WOW, you're supporting a comprehensive ministry that's both local, federal, and also international in its scope. Why don't you ask for one, if not all, 4 tranches here of my work on the book of Matthew. It's complete. Mark is coming. I've finished writing it. We'll be producing it soon. But if you don't have this yet, ask for it. When you do, remember our ministry. We really are looking for your best ministry gift, and boy, do we appreciate it. Together we can make good things happen. I'll see you again next time.
Contact us. Jim Cantelon today. P.O. Box 989, Burlington, Ontario, L7R3Y7. If you're sending a check, make it payable to Jim Cantelon today. Or visit us online at jimcantelontoday.com and click Support.